podcast every day now. Daily solutions is a podcast every day. Podcast every day is a daily solutions.
All right, welcome to the podcast.
Hey everyone, I'm Graham.
I'm Ashkahn.
And today's question is, what's the best way to get your water flowing again if salt is crystallized in the pump or pipes?
Boom, got the old salt crystallization. It happens to the best of us.
I know, I feel like you should get merit badges for all the disasters that happen in a float center after
That's
you go through them
like,
for the first time.
That's a Boy Scouts badge right there.
Yeah.
Your first salt crystallization.
Ripped liner, salt crystallized in my pump.
So this happens, let's talk about how it happens. And it can happen a few different ways. And it basically has to do with the...
Sabotage.
Sabotage is when someone's sneaking in extra little cups of salt while you're not looking. That's how it's happened to us most of the times.
We assume.
So it's basically, it has to do with the saturation point of your solution. So basically, there's only so much Epsom salt that can be dissolved into the water in your float tank. And
before it becomes more like salt crystals that happen to have some water mixed in, like the balance shifts at some point.
Yeah, and this is just anything, right? There's only so much solid you can mix into liquid, like in general, and that varies based off of the solids and the liquids, and also, most importantly here, the temperature. So what can happen is that the warmer the temperature is, the more you can dissolve a solid into a liquid. And that's because the warmer temperature is of a liquid, the more space there is in the molecules. And the process of dissolution is actually, those solids kind of fitting between those molecules. So the more space there is in there, the more you can dissolve things into it. And with float tanks, we're really close to the saturation point. We're kind of at float tank temperatures, the 93, 94 degrees. The saturation point in specific gravity is about 1.31, 1.32, like somewhere right around there. And most people are keeping their float tanks like 1.26, 27, 28, 29, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, 1.25 and above.
So like for us, once we hit 1.3, that's kind of our danger zone. And
super danger zone.
Yeah, super
too.
add
really,
water now.
Yeah, we try not to go above 1.29 generally. 1.3 is the emergency response.
So there's a couple ways you can cross that line and start getting the salt crystallizing. One is to have more salt in there, right? And that can happen because it might not be that you've added any more salt, but if you haven't been keeping an eye on your tanks and you're not balancing them on a regular basis, the water will just evaporate because of how hot it is. And eventually it'll just become saltier and saltier as the water's evaporating, and it'll just cross that threshold. That's usually not how it happens to people, because that requires a certain amount of negligence. Like it'd have to be like weeks of you really not paying attention for the levels to
and it depends a little bit on how close it's being kept to begin with, I guess. I'd say it often happens or I've definitely heard from centers it happening as a result of kind of keeping high salt content. I mean, this is exactly what happened with Float On, now that I'm saying it out loud. This is how we seized up our pumps.
One time when we seized it, it was because we were experimenting. We're like, how high can we go? And we found out how high we could go. But every other time it's been the other thing. And the other thing is that it's not that the salt content got higher and higher and higher. It's that the temperature dropped. And so as the temperature drops, that saturation point goes lower and lower. And at room temperature, the saturation point, I think, is probably, it's like 1.21, 1.22, something like
around
that.
there, yeah.
I don't know exactly, but it's something. It's lower than your float tank is the important thing. It is below what you would ever keep your float tank at.
And it's because by design we're just kicking our float tanks up to saturation for whatever our temperature is. If we were allowed to keep the float tanks warmer, then we would just throw in that much more salt.
Yeah, exactly.
So anytime your float tanks are losing temperature, you're in danger of seizing up your pumps and kind of ending up with the old salt crystal block there instead of a working piece of mechanical machinery.
So this can happen if your heaters break in your float tank, right? And then just the water is cooling down. And there's ways to deal with that as well. We have some aquarium probe heaters, something that you could just plug into a wall and put it directly into the float tank, and that could maintain the temperature. So if we do have a heater break, or if we lose power to one room but the rest of our building still works and we can run a cord from another outlet, then we have a way of maintaining the temperature in our float tank, so we don't have to worry too much about the temperature drop.
Yep. So this is if we realize ahead of time that something's a problem and that the temperature is going to be dropping and things like that. And especially in places that have even colder climates than float on. I've heard of this happening a lot or I guess places that close overnight as opposed to us. We get to cover a lot of emergencies just because we actually have people there
all the time.
All across the night. Yeah. But oftentimes people leave at the end of the day. And then when they come in the morning, there's no heat in the entire building or the electricity went off. And like there's crystals all covering the bottom / inside of their float tank. And their pump is often one solid piece of salt chunk.
So again, that can happen and it does happen, but it's still not the actual most frequent way that this is happening to people. And the way that this is most commonly happening to people in their float tanks is, take it away, Graham.
The most common way to seize up your pump is by having all of the heaters functioning normally, everything else is going fine, and you're just not cycling the water in your pump. So although the water in the float tank is staying at temperature, everything is staying fine, no crystallization, that doesn't mean that any of the water throughout your pump system is actually staying at temperature. So if you're not cycling that on a regular basis, probably about 2 times a day, then it means that you're at risk of that just crystallizing. So getting the salt water crystallizing in your pipes, getting it crystallizing inside your pump, and that's probably the most common thing that happens.
Yeah, and there are a lot of float tanks that just come with built-in protections for this now. Like float tanks will have logic built into their controllers that says if the pump hasn't been run in 6 hours, cycle it for 15 minutes just to get the liquid in the pipes and the pump and everything cycled through, get warm stuff in there. And, there's just kind of a mechanism there to not allow this to happen to you. And there's ways to work around it, too. This most commonly happens, like, when Thanksgiving rolls around or some sort of holiday where all of a sudden you're like, it's a whole day and you're not at your float center where you're used to being there every day. That's when someone comes back in after that, nice sleepy Thanksgiving morning and like they turn their pump on and they just hear like, wee. It's like this high pitched noise and no water is moving and you start to panic. And it's because there's literally a giant salt crystal around the impeller in your pump and it can't spin. And so there are other solutions too, even if your float tank doesn't have a control like that built into it. Like there's all sorts of like smart outlets and stuff like that you can, work with an electrician and have something like that installed with your float tank. They can have controls in it that can run things at 3 a.m. or things that you can just run from your phone directly. So there's simple solutions like that. Or, honestly, you can just come in on Thanksgiving and run your pump system.
Or you can pay your staff to come in.
Or you can pay your staff to come in on Thanksgiving, which is honestly the solution we use at Float On. Like, we're closed so few days of the year for long enough for this to be an issue for us. That and someone's usually just like, oh yeah, I'm already going by like that way.
Yeah, I'm addicted to the coffee at the store down the street. I'm going to be by Float On anyway. Yeah.
What one of our employees said this last year. So it's not really that big of a deal. The big deal is if when you forget and then you come in the morning and you got a floater coming in 20 minutes and you turn that pump on and you hear wee. Which actually gets us to the question, finally, that was asked. What do you do in this situation?
Yeah, panic, sell your business,
get out of there. Yeah, burn it down, take the insurance money.
So what you do is actually a lot simpler than I think a lot of people think it is, which is basically like heat up the water that's in there and the salt, often by just pouring as much hot water as you can through it, or if you can actually even disconnect the pump, kind of like getting parts of it soaking, but essentially chipping away enough to get in there and get hot water on the salt crystals, and then they'll really start to dissolve faster than you probably think they will.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing is this doesn't cost any money. Like if this happens to you, you don't have to spend any money. You may have to cancel a float or two because it'll still take you, I don't know, a few hours at least to like really. Ideally, you're going to start pulling pieces apart, right? Unscrew the unions where you have unions in your filtration system. Take as many components apart as you can and just really run super hot water through all those things. And the pump will be the hardest because you won't really be able to see. But if you pour enough water, you'll start to see like kind of bigger chunks of salt coming out at some point.
Yep.
And that's basically it. You don't want to do it dry because it's going to be really hard to try to break up a salt crystal with like a knife or something. But the hot water will just slowly weaken it and melt it and dissolve it.
Yep, and be sure to keep that on the wet end as well. You don't want to be getting the hot water onto your kind of motor end of the pump.
Right. Yeah, you're not just spraying the pump down. You're pouring it. You want to pour it into the pipe.
Yep, and often we're talking about actual, hot water kettle kind of hot too, not just hot water from the shower head style hot like the
The hotter, the better. I mean, so the salt cools the water down. It's an endothermic reaction, so it's gonna strip the water of heat as it's trying to dissolve stuff. So the warmer the water you have, the easier this will be for you.
And it'll just start to happen, like, as you do it, too. At first, it'll feel like you're just actually pouring water over a brick. And, like, nothing is going right, you know? But it does. Just like salt starts to permeate things, hot water starts to permeate salt, and it'll kind of start mushifying and breaking loose. And like Ashkahn said, the good news is you don't actually need a professional to solve this problem. You just need some hot water and patience.
Yeah, and just don't, as long as you realize it, and don't just keep running your pump and not understanding what's happening and running your pump.
It's a good lesson there. If your water is ever not moving in the tank when your pump is on, like immediately turn it off and try to figure out what's going on because there's something that's getting in the way, and it's probably disastrous to your equipment if it keeps trying to run and isn't able to actually push flow through.
And then put it all back together. You know? Done, yeah. And you should be good to go.
It's just that easy. Cool. Well, if you have any other questions for us, definitely shoot them our way. Go to floatanksolutions.com/podcast.
And we will talk to you at some point, probably tomorrow.
We hope.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.